Good afternoon and welcome once again to Fired Up. I'm your host for the show, Bob Irwin. We are coming to you live from the gun store here in Las Vegas, Nevada. This show is about guns, politics, and self-defense issues. A lot of self-defense issues today, a lot of politics on the next week's show. We are broadcasting on KSHP 1400 AM radio and at the same time on YouTube. If you go there and click on Fired Up with Bob Irwin, you will find our shows currently, the one we're doing now, plus the previous shows going back about 3.5, 4 years. So mistakes I made 3 years ago are still there for people to look at and laugh. The YouTube stuff stays up forever. Nothing's ever erased from a computer, just ask Hillary. Anyway, we are contemplating an airtime change with KSHP. We're looking at a 9 in the evening slot that we may do. That's still up in the air. But I bring that up in case you tune in. If you're listening on the radio, you tune in your drive time home and we're not there. It's a hockey game or baseball or basketball. That change has probably taken place. You can always call the gun store and ask where our time slot is, and they will update you on that. We don't get a lot of warning when those things happen, but I got one coming up probably. Tonight's guest is defense attorney Donald Green, local attorney here, licensed also in California.
Yes, sir.
So you can shoot people all over the West Coast, and Don will be there to defend you.
There you go.
Although we'd rather you didn't.
Right.
Very helpful because he's also licensed in California, and we get a lot of California cases. And actually, next week's show, we're talking about some gun law changes to do with marijuana and so forth. California law will figure rather heavily in that. Just for a bit of your background, if you would, Don, would you, if I didn't say enough,
Well, thank you,
tell
Bob.
listeners who you are.
I have been a licensed attorney in California and Nevada now 33 years. The emphasis of my practice is criminal defense, gun cases, and business litigation. And specifically as to gun cases, everything from defense of the use of firearms in murder, accusations of murder, self-defense, administrative appeals to the FBI, assisting people in correcting information which was otherwise negative or derogatory on background checks, providing that the facts do support these types of appeals or resolutions by the FBI. It's tight, but sometimes it works. We also deal with people whose CCWs have been taken away. We also have problems when someone is denied a CCW and decides to petition for judicial review in our local district court.
Yeah,
That's essentially our background.
Yeah, you always have the ability, almost always, to appeal into the court system when a regulation or some officer says, no, we're just not going to let you do that. He's not the final say.
That's correct.
The officer at the scene says, well, you can't have guns anymore. No, he doesn't have the authority to do that. So that's why God made lawyers. You know, it's unfortunate, but not that you're unfortunate, but it's unfortunate we have to go through that. We usually start out, as we will tonight, with some use of firearms cases for defense. Most of the mainstream media only addresses issues with firearms use in the negative manner, who murdered who and why they should not have a gun. So we try and counter that in our small way by going over some cases where somebody did use a gun for self-defense and lawful purposes. Occasionally, even though they believe they're lawful purposes, there are still problems with it. So we don't use names of the people, we only use the state and usually the town to go over occasionally what happened so the listeners can understand what happened and look at what they would have done under the same circumstances. And sometimes we make them a little bit better. You know, if you need to shoot somebody, you can shoot them most times. Got one case tonight where the wrong guy got arrested, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Anyway, the good, bad, or indifferent. Some of these are good, some are bad. Well, they'll speak for themselves. This is from the Herald Democrat on the 17th. This is in Sherman, Texas. Local police received a call about a disturbance Wednesday night from a clerk at Whitney's grocery store on O'Donnell Street, if I'm pronouncing it right. Call came in at just after 9 p.m. at night. According to the statement from the SPD, the store clerk told dispatchers he had just been attacked in the parking lot by a person known to him. The suspect had chased him with a machete. The clerk said he shot at the suspect. The suspect was last seen running away on foot in an alley behind the store. A few minutes after the call was received by the 911 dispatchers, another one was received from a nearby resident in an apartment requesting an ambulance over a male that had been shot. There's a coincidence. What do you think those are related? The suspect did have a gunshot wound to the upper torso. He was transported by air ambulance to a hospital in Plano, where he remained, as when I got this story, in intensive care. According to the clerk, the attack stemmed from an incident earlier in the evening. The suspect came into the store, apparently just milling around. The clerk asked him to leave, and he refused. The clerk then physically removed him from the store. The suspect threatened him that he was going to come back, and he wished he hadn't thrown the guy out, things like that. The clerk told police later he went out to his car preparing to close the store, and the same person walked up yelling at him. The clerk told police he saw the subject pulling something from his waistband. Fearing that might be a gun, the clerk ran toward the alley behind the store. The subject pulled a machete out and chased the clerk. As the clerk was running away, he was able to pull his gun and shoot at the suspect. The clerk then returned to the store and called police. Police said the evidence on the scene was collected that supports the clerk's explanation of what happened. Charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon will be filed on the suspect. No arrest was made due to the medical condition so far of the suspect. He's still in intensive care. Be kind of silly to go handcuff him. The investigation is still ongoing. This story caught my attention for several reasons, because I know lots of owners of businesses who have found somebody when they went to close at night waiting for them in the parking lot. We all have customers that rightly or wrongly decide they're going to give you a comeuppance when you come out to your car. And this was one of them. So it's wise for the clerk in this case, when he went out to his car to collect whatever he's collecting before lockup, to carry his gun with him. The advice here is always carrying your gun when you have opportunity to do that. If you expect trouble from somebody who does the "I'll be back" and talk to you in the parking lot, obviously what you need to do is call the police and say, have a unit swing by as we close, please. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Depends on how busy the cops are and how seriously you view the threat. But it's odd to have somebody attack you in the front of your parking lot of your store with a machete with all the witnesses around. And apparently there were a number of them that saw this. More witnesses, less crime. When I was reading this, one of the things that came to mind, and you may remember this gentleman, Don. I didn't put it in the outline, but some years ago when I was working with the police department, my partner and I were driving down the street on Charleston, right at Main Street. And as we drove by, I saw what appeared to be a fight. A rather large guy with some kind of weapon, turned out to be a tire iron, and another guy, apparently unarmed, backing away and had his hands up and so forth. We spun around, and as I came up, we came up behind the individual who was apparently the victim. The guy saw us and dropped the tire iron, and we took him into custody. And then I realized that the guy backing away was Richard Bergault, an attorney who had been a friend of mine for years and years. And it was a funny story. I didn't realize it was him, and we kind of saved him from a beatdown with he wasn't armed. He could have been, but he wasn't. It was an ex-client of his that was waiting for him outside.
Yes.
It is exactly what happened. And it's a cute story, because Rick said he didn't notice us walking up behind the guy, and he put up his fist, and then suddenly the guy dropped the tire iron. He thought, wow, I really scared the guy. Actually, it wasn't. that we scared him. But anyway, no harm, no foul. We just happened to be there at the time. But at that moment, Rick was about to get his head stoved in with a tire iron.
Yes.
And just came out to get into his car. It's dangerous. We encourage people to pay attention to their surroundings. If you see something you don't like, see if you can get the police rolling. Obviously, you can't do that every time there's somebody in your parking lot, but it's just a normal danger. I don't know. Have you ever had that experience yourself? Had a client that didn't like the result?
Not so much the client who was coming after me, but they usually file papers in court saying if you didn't do a good job.
Well, yeah, I
rather
can see
than the
that.
ones
That's okay.
rather than the ones with the tire on, but I'm sure it's a distinct possibility.
Yeah, it's a fun story. I had Rick in class here a couple of years ago. We relayed the whole story to the class. It was kind of cute. But pay attention when you're leaving your house. Pay attention. You know, there's somebody in your driveway. You don't know who's there. Call the police. Ask them to come by. That's what they're there for. It's what they go to the police academy for. So they can be the knight in shining armor and come save you.
And as to your example here from Sherman, Texas,
Yeah.
if we notice the timing of the incident itself, that the clerk had the earlier confrontation with the suspect in the parking lot, or at least, excuse me, when he physically removed the suspect. Notice that the clerk of the store clerk assessed the situation. There was no threat of imminent death or great bodily harm. He physically removes the suspect from the store, which was, in my estimation, a very good use of judgment and assessing the situation. That's very important, especially when you're going to use deadly force. And as you point out, there was no use of deadly force until the clerk, in retreating towards the alley or in the alleyway of the store, uses force, that is the firearm, when he sees the suspect with what appears to be a machete, which there's no question that can cause death or great bodily harm. But the moral of the story is, from a legal standpoint, is there's no question that deadly force was met with an equal, commensurate amount of force. Fortunately, the suspect didn't die, but he could have. And I do believe that even though this case is still under investigation, I do believe that the store owner is going to be exonerated, especially because it's in Texas.
Yeah. Well, you realize, I mean, any jury outside of New York City is going to look at this and go, yeah, I'd have shot him too. Yeah. He gave him warnings, obviously. He gave ground, tried to avoid it. Perfect shoot. If he's sued over this in court, he's going to lose. Jury's going to look at that and say, I'd have shot the guy too. End of case. This is Maurice County Sheriff's Department. Said a man is in serious but stable condition after he was shot on Saturday night. Oh, there's another one. I didn't put where it was. Huh. Anyway, it's ABC channel KMIZ TV 17. It's in Maurice County, wherever it was. When I locked these, I always put the state. I didn't. The incident took place just after 6 p.m. at a home on south of Vienna in the 12,000 block of Highway 63, if that narrows it down in the United States for you people. The sheriff there, Chris Heitman, stated an injured individual had shown up at a home off the Highway 63 where a woman who has a restraining order against him resides. The deputy said the woman's husband saw an individual peeking through the window of the home. When the husband confronted him, the peeper allegedly made a threatening move toward his waistband, interpreted by the husband as reaching for a weapon. That caused the husband, who's the resident of the house, to fire his gun. This apparently peeping Tom type was shot in the groin area. The Maurice County Sheriff's Department said emergency responders arrived quickly and possibly saved his life. The prowler is likely to be facing charges of a protective order violation, trespassing, third-degree assault. The sheriff said the homeowner will not likely face charges. A police report will be sent to the prosecuting attorney's office for review, which is always done after a shooting. If somebody's hurt, there's actually an attorney that works for the government in some capacity that's going to review the case. When the officer on the scene says, fine shooting, here's a free bullet, that isn't the end of it. There's going to be a legal look at what you did. there isn't any comment in this particular story about whether the suspect actually had a gun. When he made the motion as if he's reaching for one, it's clearly a reasonable assumption on the part of the husband to interpret that as the guy reaching for a weapon. This is a valid shooting. Pretending you have a gun, if you do that, your victims are allowed to believe you do have a gun, period. Same as if I'm correct, you do a robbery of a store, you have your finger in your pocket going, give me the money or I'll shoot you. They're of course allowed to believe you really have a gun and fire at you if you intimate that you have one.
That's correct.
And so this would be a good shooting. Given this guy was a peeping Tom into the home, he was shot in the groin. It's probably just good luck. We'll probably never know whether that was an aimed shot. And the other comment on this is protective orders. When I worked for the constable's office, I issued a lot of protective orders, served a lot of protective orders. And most of the person that was served will obey the order for contact. If they do disobey it, it'll be a phone call or something, not a confrontation. Where you have a guy like this that has been served a protective order and he shows up at the house where she's married to somebody else at this point, sometimes the protective orders are worthless. They're made out of paper. And as a backup, you need to have some lead, which will go through paper if necessary. That's kind of contrite, but reality is a small percentage of these idiots will ignore the protective order and show up anyway. Don't count on that protective order helping. Usually it does, not every time.
That's correct.
You've dealt with them many times.
Many times. And in this example, Bob, it's a very, and I don't want to use this, I don't try to use this very often. This is a very timely issue. Notice there's two critical points here. First, the wife has a current restraining order or protective order against the assailant. Now, we don't know the relationship. The second point is, and it's not clear from the facts in the police bulletin and the police blotter here, was the shot fired through the door? It does mention that the people made a threatening move to the husband, interpreted as reaching for a weapon. But was he behind the door? Was the door open and the shot was fired? If it was through the door, here's the big point. Does that vitiate, that is, does that undercut the critical point of bare fear? Especially when you're seen reaching into your pocket. At that moment in time, can you fire the weapon? Maybe, maybe not. If I pull out a wallet, if I pull out, I just wanted to return my ex-girlfriend, now your wife's wallet or portfolio of pictures which she left, and I'm going to get killed over that, well, why do you have it here in your waistband? So as you pointed out, from a law enforcement perspective, you have to look at it as, this case is not over. There could be charges against the homeowner, especially if he shot through the door, and was there in fact a weapon retrieved, which I don't think we see.
No, there's nothing in the reports that indicated whether or not the guy actually had a weapon. And this is probably, I needed another few days to let this cook before I put it on the air, because we've got some questions here. Especially when I leave the state out. If this took place in Alabama, it's a good shoot. If it took place in New York City, it's a bad shoot.
That's correct.
And there we are, because there are different laws and different case law, different attitudes in the courts across the country. And I hate to say that but we do. We have different enforcement of the same type of law depending on the region of the country you're in. That's probably a good thing, though, in the long run, because we have individual states with their own laws, and that's a good thing. The gun store offers free concealed carry permit classes every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. If you want to learn about when you can shoot, when you can't shoot, and how to do it safely within the bounds of the law so you can save your life and not end up in jail, Sign up for the classes on our website, thegunstorelasvegas.com. Click on there. They'll tell you where to sign up for class. And we'll get you some training. It's not required that you get a concealed carry permit. We recommend it for people that are just want to have a gun at home and know what the rules are. This is nj.com in Newark, New Jersey. 43-year-old woman whose name was not disclosed, you'll understand why in a minute, was getting out of her car at Commerce Street and McCarter Highway around 9:30 p.m. Thursday night. When she was approached by two men, the pair demanded her money at gunpoint. Turns out the woman, who's a retired New York City Police Department detective, had retired 9 months earlier, then pulled her gun and shot the two men, according to the Public Safety Director, Anthony Ambrose. The woman drew and fired her gun at the two men, who fled the scene. Apparently both were hit. Police on Friday identified the accused robbers as locals from Newark. One was age 22, the other is age 27. Both are treated for non-life-threatening injuries and face charges including robbery, weapons offenses, and so forth. Police recovered a replica gun that was believed to have been used in the robbery attempt. We just talked about that a moment ago. The investigation into the incident is continuing. Lots of interesting points here. The one, we now discover they had a replica gun. At least one of them was a replica gun. They both pointed guns, and we know one was a replica. We'll assume that both were. They're playing the odds here. This is in New Jersey. Few civilians are allowed to carry guns in New Jersey. You have to be the governor's cousin or something, or whatever their rules are. It's almost impossible to get a permit, illegal to have hollow point ammunition, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of rules. That's why they have so little crime in New Jersey, right? Is all the gun wants. It really works. Anyway, they managed to stumble onto an ex-cop who was carrying as their intended victim. The odds get there once in a while. Sooner or later, New Jersey probably will be smart enough to allow honest citizens to carry guns, and the crime rate will start to drop dramatically, because the bad guys will start worrying about getting shot, and they'll return to shoplifting instead of armed robberies, I would think. There's a note here. We always like to help educate armed robbers because it's really a tough line of work. Don't bring a fake gun to a real gunfight. The rules allow the individual who you're pointing your toy gun at to believe it's a real gun, of course, in the dark at 9:30 at night. Why wouldn't you? And all this is happening is these guys are eliminating themselves from the gene pool, probably, if they continue to choose this robbery as a career, especially a robbery with a fake gun. These guys aren't terribly bright, obviously. Anyway, hopefully they'll discontinue. They probably won't, but
They probably won't.
bring a fake gun, pick out a retired cop to rob. Just poor choice all the way around.
The probability of that happening is remote, but it does happen.
Yeah.
And your point, Bob, is taught in your CCW classes, and probably every CCW class in which I've ever attended or lectured at in the past 3 decades. The fear which you must demonstrate at the time of the use of deadly force by using a firearm is assessed in milliseconds. And in this case, when you're confronted with someone who has a fake or an airsoft or replica type pistol, you don't have time to ask if the weapon is in fact an airsoft pistol, which has had the orange tip painted or sawed off or cut off. You don't have time to pretend that you're in the third Die Hard movie when the bad guy brother of Hans Gruber looks over and says, "Oh, you've got the safety catch on. That's why you can't shoot me." That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And this officer assessed the situation in milliseconds based on her training, but that's a good reason why you, the viewer, need to continue with your education when it comes to concealed firearms. Not so much an identification of fake weapons, because the law does not require you to know that the weapon in front of you is capable of that great bodily harm or injury or death, such as any firearm. The law requires you to that at that moment in time, someone presented what appeared to be a weapon, and although it turned out to be fake, and you dropped him, you shot him, you killed him, you put him in the hospital, as long as your as long as your belief was reasonable, then you're going to prevail.
Yeah.
So this is an excellent example of that point.
It's all we do in court. When he goes in as attorney or I go in as an expert witness, we look at the jury and say, you know what? I'd have shot the guy too. From what you knew at the time, you're going to die. You fire your gun. That's reasonable. You're always permitted to save your own life. At the gun store, we do put on machine gun shooting and pistol shooting events for corporate groups, bachelor parties, weddings, any group event. You can contact Melissa at thegunstorelasvegas.com for reservations. You can find that on our website and have a good time when doing that. Let's see. This was, oh, yes, this is interesting. This is from M Live in Michigan. The TWAS, I hope I'm saying that right, TAWAS City, Michigan. Back on the 14th, just after 8 p.m., troopers from the Michigan State Police West Branch Post responded to a home invasion complaint in the 800 block of First Street. They'd been dispatched after a 911 call was placed about rifle shots and a man going door to door with a gun. The initial investigation revealed the suspect who was going door to door was seeking help regarding a home invasion and robbery which had just occurred at his residence where he was the victim. This is odd and it's an eye-opening thing, really. This guy is 66 years old. He was in his home when two men entered. No details as if they broke through or the door was left unlocked. But two men entered. They were wearing masks and brandishing large hunting knives. The intruders attempted to rob the resident, but he managed to retrieve a rifle that was leaning against the wall near the bedroom door. He subsequently shot both of them. One suspect, a 21-year-old guy from Oscoda, was dead and still wearing his mask when the troopers arrived. The second suspect, a 29-year-old man from the same town, received treatment for a gunshot wound at the scene and was then flown to Saginaw Hospital. He's expected to survive. The homeowner was not injured, is cooperating with investigators. He has not been arrested. It's unclear why the suspects targeted this particular homeowner. There's no indication that the bad guys knew this guy or had ever met him or anything like that. When the investigation is complete, again, it'll be submitted to the county prosecutor's office for review. We have apparently a very disoriented elderly victim. It's after 8 o'clock, which may be his bedtime. I don't know. He's 66, way younger than me. But anyway, he's just had two guys in his living room. He grabbed a rifle, he shot at them, and they ran out. One of them subsequently died. He wasn't aware of that. As far as he knew, they both just ran away. Now he's going door to door looking for somebody to call 911 or help him or get him back to reality here. Reading the details, he was just completely disoriented by the whole thing. So he's knocking on doors with the rifle in his hand when the neighbors had heard gunshots. They did call 911 and police got there and got the rifle and got him calmed down and so forth. Good choice for him to have a loaded rifle within reach. It is a warning to folks when somebody's knocking on your door in the dark and you look out and see a guy holding a rifle, don't assume it's a bad guy. It could be this 1 in a million disoriented guy who's a victim.
Yes. This case, I think all the viewers and the listeners should pay attention to this case. When you're involved in a shooting, unless there are other shooters, well, no, number one, don't chase them out of your house. Unless there's something compelling for you to leave the scene, stay in place. You're going to do several things. Number one, by moving, you're going to change the dynamics for the CSI and the criminalistics people. You're going to trample over gunshot residue. You're going to step in blood. You're going to change the dynamics. You may knock over a casing, which would have been from the suspect's rifle. Stay in place. Call 911. Identify yourself, what you're wearing, where the weapon is, whether the weapon you believe that you used is loaded, whether the suspect has a weapon, the location of the suspects, and then say nothing else other than you want to speak to a lawyer. You point out that the victim in this case is going door to door after gunshots are heard. And apparently neighbors did call 911. The victim could have been mistaken as a suspect, especially in today's world with all the heightened awareness of the police and people with firearms, police getting murdered, writing tickets. They don't know who is who. And that's why I think that this is still under review by the county attorney's office. And as Yogi Berra said, it's not over until it's over.
Very, very noteworthy case, as Don said. I can't imagine how a neighborhood in Las Vegas would react if somebody in the dark. It's only 8 o'clock at night, but it's dark. Obviously, this is after daylight savings time and all that stuff. If they have that in Michigan, it's dark, and there's a guy out there yelling for help at your front door with a gun in his hand. Fortunately for him, the neighbors called 911 and didn't open the door to confront him, because they would have opened the door probably and ended up shooting him.
Yes, or they would have been shot. Again, yeah. we don't know who the...
Of course, they don't know who he was. They
right.
They would assume he's a threat to them. And all it is
a very valid threat.
Excuse me,
a very valid point for them to consider him as a threat at night with a weapon knocking on the door.
If you remember, a few years back, we had a famous case where a lady was apparently drunk driving, a young woman, and she wrecked her car, and it hit the dashboard with her head, and she ended up stumbling around. She came to somebody's house looking for help, being disoriented, and he shot her through his door, and he ended up going to jail. She was only looking for help, and instead, when somebody's beating on your door, I need help, call 911.
Yes.
And in this case, the idiot fired through the door and shot this woman and killed her. He's in jail. It's all the arguments you could make that was a reasonable firing for him to do, all went away in court. The jury didn't buy it. And of course they didn't buy it. What's wrong with you? Why would you fire at someone beating on your door when you have no idea what's happening? Just call the cops.
That's right.
If they come through the door, entirely different story. Anyway, this is one I saved for you particularly, Don, because of being licensed in California. Yeah, this just annoyed me. And this is from the Press Democrat. I don't know if it's a Democratic paper. It's called the Press Democrat. On the 18th, a few days ago, Cloverdale, California, a 43-year-old man is arrested after he inadvertently fired a gun while scuffling with a 17-year-old boy, the Cloverdale Police Department said on Thursday. The incident began when the 17-year-old, who wasn't identified because he's a juvenile, confronted the resident at his Merlot Street home, according to Cloverdale Police Chief Stephen Kramer. The teen apparently believed the resident had vandalized his truck. The resident demanded the teen leave, but the boy refused. Now, there's nothing in this report stating that the 17-year-old was actually in the guy's house. It reads like he was, but we don't know that for sure. Could have been on the front porch. Anyway, the teen believed this guy vandalized his pickup truck. He had all tricked out. The resident demanded the teen leave the house or leave the area. The boy refused. The resident then retrieved a Glock 30 45 caliber pistol, pointed it The teen still refused to leave, and the two of them engaged in a pushing and shoving match. According to police, during that engagement, the 43-year-old, the resident, inadvertently fired his gun in the air. Now, to me, that indicates they're outside the house, so probably. The teen then fled and ran to a police officer who happened to be at the end of the block doing something else. The officer, of course, went over, said the resident was very contrite, admitted that the gun had been inadvertently discharged. No one was injured. The shooter was cited to appear December 19 in Sonoma County Superior Court. Okay. I know it's a crime to fire your gun in the city limits. Has to be. I don't know what the statute is. You probably do. If you're in an urban area and you fire your gun in the air, there's a crime attached to that in almost every jurisdiction. This is an accidental shot. Hit nothing while he was trying to push the teenager away from or out of his house. This is why society invented defense lawyers. The case, to me, seems backwards, that the juvenile is not being charged with coming up to him and starting a fight when he's ordered off the property, refusing to leave. I realize there's only a trespassing charge there, but they get into a shoving match. He fires a shot in the air accidentally, and now he's the guy going to court, and the juvenile isn't. It's possible this guy is looking at spending Christmas in jail.
Or prison.
Yeah, so what happens? California law. Now, there's probably more details here we don't have.
Yes.
So we're speaking in generalities here in case Don has to defend this guy later. So.
Based on what we know, we have to look at our jurisdiction. We have to look at California, which is definitely not gun friendly. But notice in this blotter, the word inadvertent or inadvertently is mentioned twice. In some jurisdictions, there's a difference between an inadvertent use of a firearm or inadvertent display of a firearm and an accidental display of a firearm. Inadvertence generally connotes that I intended to use the firearm and somehow or another it went off. That's inadvertence. Accidental is when I'm pulling out the firearm at the gun range. I didn't realize that I have a Glock. My finger is right on the trigger. It pulls it, it fires, but unfortunately it's downrange. Is that inadvertent or is that accidental? In this case, if this was in Nevada, I think that the situation would be reversed. In most jurisdictions, which are gun friendly, the 30+ states which are except the Utah and the Florida and Virginia permits are probably the 17-year-old would have been in jail for the assault rather than the homeowner or the resident. But this is California. The weapon is a 45 caliber. I'm not sure whether the Glock 30 is a compact type weapon for the Glock, but regardless of its type and caliber, the weapon was fired in the air, as I understand it, during one portion of the struggle. Right. So why would he be arrested? Because it's quite possible that the weapon could have been fired into the body of the 17-year-old. It could have been fired into the ground, but it was fired into the air. What is the result? Why is the 46-year-old arrested? Why is he going to be cited? Because it's California, and it's a politically correct arrest in California, not in Nevada. But I do want to make that very clear about the difference between an inadvertent discharge and an accidental discharge.
I had a case that was now only 3 or 4 weeks ago where we were defending a guy, different attorney, but I was defending a guy who inadvertently fired a gun, his Glock, in the air. Same thing. The safety's in the trigger. I love Glocks. Carried Glocks on duty forever. but the safety's in the trigger. You got to keep your finger off the trigger. If you get tense, you tighten up, somebody smacks you and you grasp the gun, you're going to have an AD or an inadvertent discharge. We call that an ID.
Okay.
No one in that case also, look, the circumstances were different, but the result was the same. He fired a gun accidentally in the air, and the guy is charged with firing a gun in an area, in an urban area and so forth and so on. And we were able to argue under Nevada law that though Nevada law specifies that is dangerous to fire a gun in the air, it can be a crime because it's dangerous to do, therefore there's a statute. But our argument for the defense with the jury was no one was hit.
Right.
So who cares? It didn't cause any harm. The bullet didn't come down and hit anybody. The other side argued, well, it could have hurt somebody and therefore he should go to jail. And I was able to argue, and they let it in, which surprised me, that, well, yeah, but the results are no one was hurt. So we're not dealing with a hypothetical that somebody could have been hurt. No one was hurt. So why is this guy, being tried for this crime? And as it turned out, we got a 10 not guilty versus a 2 guilty out of the jury, and the case went away. Rather expensively to the guy, but I can see this case here going exactly the same way. The person I always go after in classes and in testimony, who supplied the force for the confrontation? The kid supplied the force.
That's correct.
He came to the guy.
Yes.
So he's the one responsible for the argument. And certainly when the resident said, go away, get off my property, whatever, and he refused, he's even more responsible for the confrontation. But that's Nevada versus California. And
also in California, to the surprise of many, including probably over 50,000 attorneys in the state of California, in the California Constitution, there is no provision for bearing arms. It is one of only 3 states, New York and California. Don't have the other state right offhand, but there's a right to defend yourself in California, but no right to bear arms, specifically in the California Constitution, which has been a state since 1849.
Wow. So if you're going to have a inadvertent discharge, have it in Nevada. Try not to let the round land over the border. I just looked at this, and this is absolutely backwards. The wrong guy's in jail, or the wrong guy has a court hearing, and he's out of jail. And I can, you can just see this with a jury that doesn't believe anybody should have a gun going the wrong way. This is kind of a follow-up story, and it's fairly long, but I wanted to talk about it here because it's an older story. This is from Buck's Local News. It's in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Really quick, back on the 15th of November, at almost 10 o'clock at night, 2 men entered a pizzeria brandishing what appeared to be handguns, wearing dark clothing, surgical gloves, and bandanas over their face. Ta-da! They pointed their weapons at the faces of the store owner and a customer who had arrived a few minutes earlier and ordered them to give us all of your stuff. One of the suspects had ordered the customer down on the floor and then pistol whipped him in the temple, because I guess he didn't get down fast enough. As the customer dropped to one knee, the suspect that was over him looked away for a minute. The customer pulled out a .45 caliber handgun and shot the guy who had pistol whipped him, killing him. He then fired 2 shots at the second robber, striking him in the throat, and he fell in the doorway. The customer then trained the weapon on robbers until police arrived. The Bucks County DA, Matthew Weintraub, announced that his office would not be pressing charges against the 35-year-old man who he described as a lifelong law-abiding citizen and business owner who carried a concealed weapon solely for his own protection. He was the victim of a hideous crime, more than merely a robbery with a handgun. He was pistol whipped. He used his gun only to the extent he needed in order to save his own life and that of the intended victim, the pizza shop owner. That's all good. The robbers were both identified as locals from Bucks County. The dead guy is 24. The other guy is 22, was his brother. Security video caught the whole robbery and the pistol whipping and everything on tape. So we've got great evidence, you know, of the guys being innocent and so forth. So far, so good, right? This is a state where they have really tough gun laws, Pennsylvania. The DA then added at the end, there'll be no charges for the shooter today, but we could have charged him with a gun law violation. The man's permit to carry a concealed handgun was expired. What do you have to be thinking to even bring that up?
They had nothing better to do but to check this out. Question comes up at this past weekend at the gun show. At least 2 people at the gun show at the Sports Center at near the airport here in Las Vegas had said that they had concealed weapons permits. That's good. Have you gone through additional training? No, I felt that the only training I needed was my CCW. And I said, well, you know, when does it expire? Just a routine question. Guy looked at his wallet and his CCW had expired. And he's packing in open carry a firearm, which I'm sure he registered at the front desk when he came into the gun show. But there's a classic example right there. Check your firearm. Check your permit. But in this case, it's a good example, and I know it's a follow-up story from just recently, that a confrontation with perpetrators can occur anywhere. Your home, your work, parking lot, as a customer in the pizzeria. And notice that the threat that these perpetrators have threatened the clerks and the customer, give us all of your expletive deleted. And when they pistol whipped the customer, had him down on his knees, the customer, seeing the right moment, pulls out his .45, and I noticed that this is the second example which you pointed out today in which someone has used a .45, which is what I carry. But the customer took his necessary steps, looked at it, there's deadly force being applied. Where am I at? Where's the threat? I shoot. And I hit some of the perpetrators, one or both of the perpetrators, and there's no question that there was deadly force. And then, as you point out, the prosecutor wanted to be politically correct and give everyone else the benefit of the doubt. We could have charged him because his permit had expired. Now, that is a crime in and of itself, to carry a concealed weapon when it's expired. It's as if there is no CCW.
He didn't legally have one.
Exactly.
A CCW. But the nice prosecutor chose, for whatever reason, to point that out and then decide not to prosecute him. Now, there's always a twist. Here's the twist. The 2 bad guys, 1 dead, 1 wounded, had fake guns. Again, replicas. One of the clues, I found it in the reports, one of the clues was that the first guy that he hit the victim upside the head with a pistol, and yet the guy, when he goes to his knees, draws his gun and shoots. Well, if you got hit upside the head with a real pistol, you'd be a little dinged for a while, presuming there's some substantial force. He was getting hit with a plastic airsoft gun, which of course he wouldn't know the difference, but having not normally been hit upside the head with a gun very often. So now I'm looking at this, and I didn't even put it in the outline, but now we get a lawsuit, perhaps,
Yes.
because the kid's gun really wasn't dangerous, and the guy wasn't legally allowed to be carrying his gun. Lawsuit.
And even if the guy did have CCW insurance through some of the carriers which you see on the internet and the gun magazines and at gun shows, they're probably not going to cover him because it was expired. So theoretically, this guy is looking at a Chapter 7. But if the attorneys for one or both of the victims argued that this was an intentional crime, that he can't discharge that in bankruptcy, this guy's broke the rest of his life.
This is a real dicey case, and all we have is a guy defending his own life against a perceived very real threat, and yet it can go south on something as stupid as your permits expire.
Yes.
That's the wedge that could be used in a lawsuit. Yeah, I hate it. This is another backwards case. You got to pay attention. I'm trying to look at the time here. I think we've got about, when did we start actually, Justin, do you know? About 5 after, 6 after, something like that?
Still got about 5.
Okay. Couple of, well, let me, before we go to these, let me go to the ending stuff first, so, because I always run out of time. I always write more stories than I have time to use on the air. We've got an announcement I want to make. Next week, Don is my guest again. We've got 2 major issues that have come up this week, and we're still trying to straighten out what the rules are. We have a new law, it's not a law. We have an opinion from ATF that says if you're a user of marijuana, even if it's legal in the state for you to do that, up till now, it's being because you had a medical marijuana card, you're allowed to use marijuana. That is still prohibits you from possessing a firearm. It prohibits you from buying a firearm.
Yes.
Whether it prohibits you from possessing one is an issue we're going to try and straighten out. But right now, if you come into a store, they've done a new 4473 that asks if you use marijuana at all, legally or illegally. If the recreational marijuana thing passed, so in Nevada, theoretically on the 1st of January, you can use it. There's no place to buy it yet, but whatever. If you check on the form that you do use marijuana, the feds say you can't have a gun, can't buy a gun. If you use marijuana and you check on the form that you don't use marijuana, that's a felony for lying on the form.
Yes.
Basically, if you use marijuana, you're screwed. You can't have guns. The question is, are we going to make that retroactive to guns already owned? And we're going to do some serious work on that. I got a lot of data already. It's too complicated to do on one of these shows. So next week's show is going to be that issue and the mandatory now, sort of mandatory universal background checks. They're supposed to start on the 1st also. There's a huge hitch in that because we've got dealers being told by the ATF now. I have a ruling letter that tells them how we handle that. I've got ruling opinions from the Department of Taxation and all these state agencies that tell us to handle it another way. What is actually possession of the gun? Do we get to run the gun to see if it's stolen? Are we giving stolen guns to people from party A to party B? The feds say we're taking possession of the gun when it comes in. Therefore, it needs to be in our standard acquisition and disposition book.
Yes.
Meaning lots of other things. Then we get pawn laws coming in. If we take a gun in, we have to hold it for 30 days. Under most circumstances, we have to charge sales tax. There's a lot of stuff that isn't clear, and we're going to dedicate the whole show next week to those 2 issues and hopefully the right answers. Another gun news thing, I wanted to get that out of the way. Let me get the gun shows out of the way too, because there's some confusion about this too. Coming up this weekend, we have at Cashman Field, we have the Great Las Vegas Gun Show. That is a new company in town. They do shows all over the country, mostly in the Midwest. They're going to be at Cashman the 26th and 27th. We'll be there. I have a table down there. I don't know if you're going to that one, Don, or you're going to the other
No,
one.
we'll be at the Santa Fe.
There's 2 of them. Yeah,
Yes, we'll be at the Santa Fe.
the Western Trails Gun Show is at the Santa Fe on the north end of town in the same weekend. So we've got 2 gun shows competing with each other. These companies don't know each other, or maybe they could have coordinated that. So we've got 2 of them on the same weekend. Also, Rocky Mountain Gun Show is going to be at the World Trade Center, a 4-day show, December 8th through 11th. We've got a table set up there also. So we will be at both of these shows. And now I just found out, just before I went on the air, there's another one in between there that somebody else is running. I'll get that on next week. They'll be on our website, yeah. Crossroads, yeah, is going to be at Cashman.
Right, like the 18th
Yeah,
of December.
just before Christmas.
Right.
It's after these two shows. Or these three shows, two on the same weekend, we're going to have a lot of gun shows, which means there'll be no customers in any of them to let anybody make money because they don't ever talk to each other. It's like 8 gun shops all building in the same block, and everybody doesn't make money. And we'll be back next week in our regular times with this special on marijuana laws and background checks. You want to tune in for that one. We're going to put some publicity out for it. And hopefully we'll answer some of your questions when we get there. A note from the National Shooting Sports Foundation on the 17th, a couple days ago. St. Louis, Missouri, 28th Ward Alderwoman Linda Cruson announced she's filing a bill that would ban assault weapons inside the city limits. The bill would make it illegal within St. Louis for anyone to import, sell, manufacture, transfer, possess an assault weapon, undefined. If the bill passes, the city residents would have 60 days after it becomes law to dispose of their firearms that meet this description or remove them from the city. If it passes, I would suggest you guys from St. Louis drive out here. You can turn them into the gun store. We'll take them. Fortunately for gun owners, Missouri has a very strong preemption statute that says only the state legislature can make firearms laws. So when they pass this law, it's illegal. The other thing that needs to be realized is assault rifles, military style rifles, are already illegal for criminals to have. It's already illegal to murder people, and yet they're doing it anyway. So this will have no effect on reducing crime, as those of us in this industry know. And we're supposed to believe these people that want to ban them and take them away from honest people don't know that? Of course they know that. It will fail because it's illegal under the law in the state. So they can pass it all they want, but the state owns it. We are running out of time, unfortunately. Got a couple more stories I wanted to cover, but we're going to save them for 2 weeks because next week we're going to be on marijuana and background checks. Tell everybody you know to tune in. We're going to put some notifications here and there, and hopefully by then we'll have enough information to make everything work.
Good.
Thanks for listening. Or if we don't have the answers, we'll know where the questions are.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for having me, Bob.
Thanks for being here one more time, sir. And we will talk to you. Have a great Thanksgiving. Don't eat too much. You need to still fit in your clothes when we're on the air next week and you're watching. Thank you.